Let's talk about heavy fighters. If you put two pilots of equal skill inside a light fighter and a heavy fighter, the light fighter will always win. That said, the heavy fighter does still have its place. Today we'll be covering the Guardian QI, which I personally believe to be one of the best freight hunters in the game at the moment. This is because of its ability to snare and its powerful punch. Your role in the heavy fighter is to maintain an optimal distance between you and the enemy craft. If you're up against another heavy craft, the goal is to stick as close as possible so that you can use knife fight to your advantage. This is the fun part about heavy fighters, as knife fighting is still very possible unlike in light fighters. Now if you're up against a light fighter, you actually want to push him away from you and try to maintain him about 400 to 600 meters so you can effectively land shots and still have room to react. With the main points out of the way, let's look at some fights so we can better understand how to use the heavy fighter. And thanks to the new information that we now get on the HUD, I'm going to leave these videos in full speed and only focus on the theory as to why I do some of the maneuvers that I do. First up, light fighters. So off the bat on my merge, my goal is to kind of keep within 300, 400 meters, somewhere around there so I can keep them inside my picture. As we're kind of fighting here, I'm just trying to up strafe now and creating this circle strafe. As I line up shots, I'm boosting all the way through so that I have the energy to keep him in this distance. Anytime I can, I really want to lock him here and not allow him to pass me, but if he does, I immediately start to push through and then back away and keep the sight on picture. Now we're back at this long range where we're kind of dancing, and I try to line up some shots here, but as you can see, due to the range and speeds, they really don't connect well. I just kind of try to keep him here, use a little bit of that up strafe to keep him at the same distance, and once I have a good lineup, I go for the finish. Now that should not be possible with a heavy fighter against a light fighter, and we'll cover that later, but let's look at a medium fighter. Now past the merge, getting our nose back on, and we're keeping this distance, which is where I want to be as a heavy fighter. He's not really pushing me or engaging, so I stay here in the corkscrew and just try to apply some damage. As long as I see my shots are landing, I don't really need to close the gap. But once I start seeing that they're not quite connecting, that's when I go ahead and push a little bit closer. Now the enemy decided to push when I did, which causes us to overmerge. This is where we go back into creating space. I'm still keeping this range though and just up strafing to keep the corkscrew going, which helps me lock his pip in place so that it doesn't maneuver away too much. Once he gets into that neutral pip, you see it becomes hard for me to control it, and I have to watch for the merge. As soon as it happens, I'm pushing forward here to push away from him, and as I'm rotating my nose back towards him, I'm reversing to keep the distance locked. And now we're back on our corkscrew pushing away from his pip, and this is not where he wants to sit. You either want to stay close enough to a heavy fighter, or far enough that the velocity of the heavy fighter's weapons are not fast enough to hit you. So now what happens when we fight a heavy fighter versus a heavy fighter? This is personally my favorite matchup, as I feel there's more knife fighting capabilities. The general rule is to keep the pip semi-neutral so that it allows for flexibility and maneuverability around the enemy. That said, there are still times where you're forced to have a corkscrew battle with the enemy, but there are a lot more points of neutralization that are achievable, which allows you to push the gap on the enemy. So why don't we use cannons or want to fight a light fighter in a heavy fighter? Well, this is the perfect example. Here I have a player who knows how to maneuver his ship really well, and as you can see, he can easily maneuver his pip around, not allowing me to dictate where the fight happens, or even allow me to land any clear shots. The minute I start to get a clear line of picture, he just merges into my craft and does not allow me to rotate my gun back onto him. Anytime I'm able to reobtain that picture, he just closes the gap once more. Let's look at that once more, but from a light fighter's perspective. As you can see here on this long distance engagement, because I'm doing a corkscrew and he's using cannons, it's nearly impossible for his shots to land. Once I am in this range where it does get close quarters, I can easily outmaneuver him. As soon as he starts to get an idea of where I am, I just reposition to a different angle. And anytime he does get that distance, I get that pip back to neutral so that if I am in his line of sight, I can easily maneuver the pip to a different angle and not allow him to line anything up. On the final topic of why you may or may not want cannons is really the weapon velocity. Cannons, or attrition repeaters, which currently function as fast shooting cannons, have a velocity of about 1,000 meters per second. This means they're much slower than the alternative repeaters that hit at 1,800 meters a second, which makes long-range battles even harder for heavy fighters. Granted, it doesn't mean they're useless. If you're up against someone who doesn't have good maneuverability, or if you're up against heavier ships, the DPS that you can output with these weapons is significantly higher. That's going to wrap up this video, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.